no law shall be passed prohibiting or regulating the right of free speech or free expression. So if you take the constitutional provision literally, you'll have to agree that the Constitution absolutely prohibits the state from limiting or regulating free speech in any manner, shape, or form. But our Supreme Court has ruled that it is constitutional to limit the right of free speech, for example, by means of a law against slander, a law against libel, or sedition. So apparently, there are limits to free speech, and one of them is, for example, the limitation that speech cannot be allowed when it has no redeeming social value according to prevailing community standards. So that should be the rule. In fact, this is a rule enunciated by the United States Supreme Court. No form of expression can be allowed on media if it has no redeeming social value and it violates contemporary community standards.
Okay, so that would be kind of your, that's where you would draw your lines from, the redeeming standards, its effects on the televiewers, proven effects on the televiewers then. Okay, well, let's turn over to our panel on the same lines. I wonder if any of you have any questions.
Isa sa mga concern ko as a wife, as a mother, yung bang mga anak ko they can watch this television show any time of the day, any time of the night, especially the trailers, may mga bold scenes na para bang walang censors talaga. Kung kayo ang magiging presidente, how would you solve this problem?
I would call the major producers and other managers of electronic media, and I would appeal to them for self-regulation. I would not impose regulation externally or from above by the state. I would instead call for the members of the industry itself to regulate themselves.
And if they refuse to heed your call, what course of action would there be for you?
Then in the end, the issue will transform itself into a judicial issue. The Supreme Court will have to tell us where the line has to be drawn.
In other words, concerned citizens will have to be actively involved in terms of filing cases.
That's right. We'll have to be more litigation conscious on civic issues in this country.
Would you bring back the Board of Censors? As of now, we have a regulatory board. What do you think about that? Should we enact a law again to bring back the Board of Censors?
I sat in the Board of Censors. I was not a censor who viewed the movies and actually wielded the power of the scissors. I was given the task when I was very young, just straight out of UP Law School, to edit the so-called storylines. These are the plot summaries of movies, and I tended to be liberal because I had just graduated from the hotbed of radicalism in the country, the University of the Philippines. But I realized that it always has a chilling effect on the arts when a censor sits in judgment on the product of what might legitimately be an artist. So this is a very tricky question. I'd prefer for a so-called board of censors, maybe we'll call them by some other terminology, not to censor the movie, but to assign it a certain code so that we would know who would be qualified to be exposed to that particular form of expression. I'd prefer for this board to classify movies, for example, as for adults only or for children with accompanying parents and so on, rather than to absolutely prohibit certain movies from exhibition.
I see. Well, Tato, let's turn over to you. Would you have a question?
Mr. Santiago, on the business side, what would be the mores and values that you would prescribe? Kind of code of ethics that you may recommend if you were, let's say, president of the Philippines? What is the business climate that you would like to evolve?
I would hope for a business climate where the playing field is level, where the rules of thumb are plain and simple and are applied universally to everybody in a uniform manner, just to keep the playing field level and to keep it free of graft and corruption. In other words, once the rule has been laid down, it should be made known to everybody and no exception should be made. That's the problem with this country at this time. Too many exceptions are always made to the general rules.
Would you promote deregulation? What would be the influence of government on business?
It would be minimal. We have to have a market-friendly environment in business. And the best way to promote this kind of climate or environment is to make sure that government does not insinuate itself into legitimate areas open only to private enterprise.
Yes. I have a question which is quite related. It's more on the economy. Well, recent statements, no less than Jaime Cardinal Sin has expressed his dismay or concern about the problem of the foreign debt. In fact, he has called it immoral. The burden that is being exacted on our people in terms of the payment of foreign debts. And its effect on business and on industry is quite obvious in terms of the actual volume of capital which is being transported out, around 40% of our national budget. How do you place yourself in such a position? What is your position regarding the issue of foreign debt?
I'd classify foreign debts into two categories. The first category consists of those debts that were properly contracted or entered into. The second consists of those debts that are attended by fraud. With respect to the first category, debts that were contracted in our behalf by a properly elected agent of our state, then we must stand by our debt obligations because it is a basic principle in international law, pacta sunt servanda rebus ex tantibus. Treaty obligations must be fulfilled in good faith. Thus, I am against the so-called policy of debt repudiation. But with respect to the second category, foreign debts that are attended or characterized by fraud, then they would fall into the normal maxims of law applicable to fraudulent obligations. That is to say, they are null and void ab initio from the very beginning, and we have no obligation to comply with them.
Just on this topic of our economy and the situation we're in, I think one of the biggest difficulties and one of the biggest focuses today of the Roman Catholic Church is the widening gap between the rich and the poor. We talk of ourselves today as a church of the poor in order to identify ourselves with uplifting the poor people of the nation. Mrs. Santiago, what would you do as President of the Philippines to help the poor of the nation, to make that change that's so badly needed?
There is an urgent need to address the problem of poverty because today, out of a total population of 62 million Filipinos, 2/3 or 75% are living at the poverty line. And according to the coping surveys administered by various schools of business administration or management in our country, apparently the Filipino does not have the same capability to cope with economic difficulties that he did in 1986. It is an increasingly lowered standard of coping that is being manifested by these so-called coping surveys. So obviously the next president must have the grit, the will to win over poverty. How can this be done? Number one, we simply have to reduce the incidence of graft and corruption. For every million or billion of pesos that is stolen from the national treasury, we have a corresponding number of Filipinos who will have to go hungry that day or will be unable to buy basic medicine for illness in the family or will be unable to enroll their children by next enrollment period. Secondly, we'll have to launch a massive low-cost housing program because now we are turning into virtual colonies of squatters in our highly urbanized areas.
Excuse me, here then that would mean implementing the law to the rich and the powerful who cause this, who bring this about. Oftentimes those who are involved in some of the greatest graft and corruption are those who have the money or the abilities to do that. Well, the question there that's behind many of us Filipinos today is, how would you implement the law on the rich and the powerful in order to make the change?
It's a question of possessing the will to win. The next president must have intestinal fortitude. He must be prepared to fight individuals or even groups who possess the epidermis of pachyderms. Talagang makakapal ang mga mukha nito at ang lalakas ng mga apog. Kaya kailangan matibay ang dibdib ng ating Pangulo.
Oo.